to have a fireside chat with Michelle Eggleston Schwartz from Training Industry and Cecil Johnson with Johnson and Johnson. Michelle is the editorial director at Training Industry, and she's been with the company for more than 10 years, overseeing the production of Training Industry magazine and managing strategy forum. She's an award-winning media professional. Has been recognized by Folio as a top woman in media award honoree. We're fortunate to have her with us, as well as Cecil Johnson. He's the head of talent development in America at Johnson and Johnson, and his career spans roles from commercial, frontline revenue generating to leadership development, team leadership, global enterprise talent development, and in his current role, Cecil's responsible for end-to-end strategic integration of talent management for the region. They are going to be talking about trends in 2021 and planning for the future of learning. So everybody, please join me in welcoming Michelle and Cecil. Go ahead, take it away, Michelle and Cecil.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Happy to be here. Yes, like Bobby mentioned, I'm the editorial director here at Training Industry, and every year our company writes a report on the trends that we feel are going to make a lasting impact on the industry in the coming year. And today we're going to discuss 5 of those trends, and I'm really excited to hear from Cecil and get his perspective on these trends, and also to hear a little bit more about what's happening at Johnson and Johnson. So the first trend that I like to discuss, I think it's top of mind for a lot of learning professionals, and it's L&D's role in change management. If we're going to reflect on the past year, organizations, gosh, they were flooded with changes last year. Seemingly overnight, many organizations went remote. They were just kind of dealing with a lot of technological issues on transitioning instructor-led training to a virtual format, kind of preparing employees to deal with all of these changes. And so L&D, from my perspective, has really stepped in, and this has almost been their time to shine to help prepare their organizations at this time. Cecil, what's been your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, and thanks for the opportunity to share. It's interesting. I heard someone say, 2020 was the year of the CHRO, right? And I also think that it probably was the year of L&D. And the reason why I say that is because I think L&D, at least what I saw in our organization, was one of the quickest to respond to going virtual, in recognition of being able to connect the rest of the organization to each other. And I think that that's really important, especially in the learning context, right? And to when it comes to change, we've always had a strong role. L&D's always had a strong role with regards to change. I think learning is change, right? So if you are in a position where you're doing any type of change initiative, there has to be some new capabilities that you need your organization to step into at an individual or a group level. And L&D is the key lever to help make that happen. What I saw, which has really made me proud, was to see our L&D groups, and again, we're a big company, so distributed, but consistently take a look at how do we help reassure, increase some stability through the learning function with our employees that, hey, you aren't missing a beat here. You're still getting what you need from a capability standpoint, from a development standpoint, and then some in midst of this tragic situation that we're in, or this crisis that we are in. So, and I say it because it wasn't just a crisis, it was change, right? It wasn't just, hey, this is going to happen and you'll go back to normal. It's a change and transition that we're going through. And I think at the root of any change and transition, capabilities are key. And that's where L&D and we step in, not only at Johnson & Johnson, but to my colleagues in other organizations that I talk to, but of course to everyone that's participating in the summit.
Yeah, great. I know I've had the opportunity to really cover the training industry from a media perspective for the past 10 years. And I've really seen L&D's role evolve. L&D is no longer that order taker that just implements training upon request. They're really partnering with the business now and really trying to understand those business goals. So when these changes happen, it's seamless and you can pivot quickly. And this past year, we've really seen the value of that partnership and how important it is to ensure success.
Yeah, a couple of things I want to say, and then I'm curious about any. I know that you've done quite a bit of research, right? Your organization, so I'm just curious about that. But something that you said, I've been L&D and leadership development for quite some time, years, and the thing about the order taker is something that I detest it, right? Detest it. That just hey, don't be order taker, and some people are very comfortable in that role. I think to your point, I think the baseline is no longer order taker anymore. And I know we had evolved as an L&D community to being to having a seat at the table, but I think that is a baseline now. And I think that we need to think about being a voice in the room, because if anyone's had family dinner for Thanksgiving, I mean, you can't wait to graduate from the kid table to the adult table, but you still don't get to talk during the conversation, right?
Mhm.
And I think where L&D is at now is that we are talking during the conversation. We have a voice that people are stopping and asking us about. And at the very least, we know that we need to be that voice. But also, as I kind of mentioned, I know that in your organization, you all do quite a bit of research, metrics, et cetera. Curious about what you've uncovered, I guess, or discovered, and what you all have been looking at.
Yeah, we during the onset of the pandemic specifically, we saw some dramatic changes just in the content that our audience was searching for in those early days. We actually saw upwards of 8,000% increase in traffic to content related to e-learning, remote learning, transitioning the instructor-led to virtual, leading through change, things like that. And our response to that was we put up a dedicated topic area for remote learning to get those resources to L&D professionals. And kind of along those lines, we were also doing some pulse research at the time to really try to understand the impact of the pandemic on the training industry. And what we were finding is the majority of organizations, I think it was around 60%, were repurposing or retooling existing programs. So they were putting in a lot of work to figure out how to make their existing programs work in this virtual environment. And a lot of L&D professionals were revising existing L&D plans at the time, and or just weren't confident in their executing their plans. So we did see in those early stages there was that lack of confidence, but as the years gone on, we have seen that increase. So nice to see that the confidence is coming back.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was jotting down a note because you struck me with just some of the statistics, right? That's one thing, right? But also something that you mentioned around L&D groups revising existing L&D programs. And it was really interesting because I think that we all felt good about how we could respond in the moment and be able to revise things fairly quickly, relatively speaking, to what we may have done in the past. One of the things that I think is an opportunity across the board is now that we've got that up and we've been applauded as an L&D, organizations and groups applauded for being able to respond so quickly. I think we also owe it to our constituents to make sure that we've revised our philosophy and thinking around this also, because it doesn't make strategic value to just be able to change the way we are delivering it without thinking, okay, so now what's our thought process and our philosophy around delivering this? Because just putting things virtually doesn't necessarily make it effective. per se. And at the same time, individuals' context in the environment at home when they're learning these things is different also. So if it's still in front of someone for a dedicated period of time, it's just not in person. Well, is that the forward thinking type of philosophy one? And do we need to have more asynchronous? And do we need to have more message boards? Or do we need to be able to um, have us interact in a different way when it comes to this environment?
Hmm. That's a good point.
Which actually probably goes into, I think one of the other topics is about how we're working, right? To
Yeah.
some degree.
Kind of leading into the next trend we're going to discuss. We're going to talk about the changing nature of work, and the world of work just continues to evolve, and it's going to continue to do so through advancements in technology, automation, artificial intelligence. The way we live and work is changing, and so I actually think the World Economic Forum is actually estimating that 50% of employees are going to need to be reskilled by 2025. That's a big number. Thinking upwards of half of our employees are going to need to be upskilled or reskilled for new job roles. Can you speak a little to that? Like, can L&D ensure employees have the skills they need, not just right now, but in the future for the success of the company?
Yeah, I think that what L&D can do, which I think that we do in some do pretty well, but I think we have to make it even more robust, is that we have to be the leaders in making sense of that current and future environment. So that sense making skill that we're asking for our business leaders, we have to be just as curious as to what's emerging and align it to the interest and the business goals of the organization. So if someone says that we need to grow our business by 25% in X area in the next 5 years, then we should be the ones that are leading the way saying, well, here's the capabilities that you need. Right. And yes, we may have a consulting group that may identify some of those things, but we also need to be the ones getting kind of, as one of my mentors would say, getting under the hood and determining what exactly does that look like for our organization and our organization's culture in order for us to put those plans in place in order for us to accomplish those things. So I think that we have to lead the way from a strategic standpoint and capabilities, but also making sense of whatever this dynamic, chaotic environment is, so that our organizations can thrive. That's where I think is a key element of our role. So to your point earlier about order taker, we cannot wait for the organization to say what they need. We have to be the ones to say, here's what you're going to need. Here's what I'm noticing. And we have to, whatever industry you're in, we have to be able to take a look at other industries to make those connections that may be analogous to where we're going, so that we can give a different type of input into our organizational leaders as to what's needed.
Right. That's a good point. Kind of thinking about this post-COVID environment, are there any specific skills that you think are going to really be critical for our workforce?
Yeah, it's funny. I thought about that, and there's probably 100 of them, right? I think we've talked about this for years, but I think agility is one, right? I think one of the critical skills is that, I don't know if it's skills or mindset, behavior, but flexibility, right? One of the key skills is that you're going to have to be able to learn differently and learn a little quickly and be able to stop. I won't say stop on a dime, but be able to transition. So no longer will you have a skill no longer will you be okay with just being where you are for 10 years from a skills development standpoint. Mm-hmm. It's going to change very quickly. The other thing is around being digitally literate, right? So I think that is really important. I think we make assumptions about our participants, our constituents, of how literate they are from a digital standpoint, from the tool standpoint, and we leave some people behind, or we judge them unfairly. And I think we have to equip people with understanding what's happening in the digital environment, what tools are being used and what tools are emerging, and then be able to get ahead of that so that they're comfortable with whatever may come, and they're comfortable learning about these types of tools and resources, so that all they need to know is what it is, because they know how to learn.
Mm-hmm. That's good. The third trend we're going to talk about is around soft skills. So soft skills has really been growing in importance for quite some time. And it was actually in my company's 2020 trends report that we identified a soft skills gap across all roles and functions and industries. And lo and behold, a few months later, we were in the midst of a pandemic, and it really highlighted the need to close this gap, because leaders were now needing to support employees in brand new ways. They're needing to be more empathetic and compassionate, really leaning on their communication and listening skills to figure out how they can support employees. Can you describe kind of from your perspective, some of the challenges you've seen in terms of leadership?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that as you mentioned, the pandemic may have accelerated some of these things. I think we've always talked about a soft skills gap, though, right? I think it's always been, well, maybe not soft skills gap, maybe a balance, right? How do we balance that? And I think it ebbs and flows. I think one of the things is that from a leadership standpoint, what was highlighted was the degree of empathy that we were looking for leaders to have, because we were dealing with this terrible situation, and we were starting to see leaders heighten anxiety, and them wanting to drive and see something happen, as opposed to understanding where individuals were in that. It was just exacerbated during this crisis, which also makes us wonder what was happening that we did not see prior, right? Mm-hmm. That this pandemic just kind of highlighted. The other thing is that soft skills that we've always talked about, vulnerability, right? Soft skills that we always talked about around coaching, right? You mentioned listening, but listening in a different way, because you may not have the benefit, at least in this context, of body language like you had before. Yeah. So you have to really be it, and also, in order to listen, you have to have a mental diary, and you have to have a memory that I can tell when Michelle is saying something in a different way, and she's behaving in a different way in this, 1 inch, 2 inch square. And I can notice that. I can notice subtleties in how she's communicating with me via text, via email. And now, how do I respond to that? And from a vulnerability standpoint and a learning standpoint, as a leader, being open to knowing that you have to change what you believe to be true with regards to leadership in this space. And what I mean by that is what I just mentioned, which is, what does empathy look like? And now that you're peering into someone's home, per se, what does leadership, how does that look different when you really are tapping into more of the whole person, and you cannot ignore the rest of them, consciously or unconsciously?
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Going into the next trend, kind of extends our conversation around leadership. And many organizations have gone remote. And kind of I think everyone struggled with that, employees and managers, but leaders specifically struggled in terms of managing employee performance in a remote environment. Because you have to think, some leaders who were accustomed to managing employees in a traditional office environment, where they could just kind of casually walk by, check in, talk in the kitchen, they weren't really having to provide much structure if they didn't feel like that was needed. And now they're left in this remote environment, kind of you need new skills, new leadership skills to manage that. I guess thinking in terms of this remote environment, are there any tools that you can suggest on how it might be helpful to manage employee performance?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, and I think I have a provocative way to go about this, answering this question, and it comes from a mentor of mine, and one of my professors in grad school, who talks sometimes about this. But the question that I would have for leaders is, why is it different? And what I mean by that is, do you need the tools to make you feel comfortable, or do you need the tools to really help your employee get better, right? Because let's say you're in an office environment. What is it that you need to see against the outcome that the employee needs to produce, that you're going to change? So for example, if you're in the office and you're not, again, I'm talking about the knowledge worker, not necessarily the line worker or the plant worker, but so you're still in meetings with that person, right? You're still seeing their thought process. You're still seeing their work product via email. So what is it that you're not seeing by being in the office that is making you feel uncomfortable, that you may not be effective at managing someone's performance? Because at the end of the day, it's what's the output, right? What's the outcome of what they are doing? So I think that when we talk about tools, I wonder if there are more behaviors, right? Because what I've seen is that those individuals who are uncomfortable with people working remotely are the same ones who are saying, so Michelle, so what were you doing at 2 o'clock? Right? So so, oh, you had lunch it's those same behaviors that come out remotely and virtually that they do in the office. The difference is that I can see you at your desk. So I know that you've given me the perception of working. I may not know what you're doing. You may be doodling or whatever, but I feel more comfortable as a leader, right? So I think that there's leaders need to change what they have required of themselves to feel comfortable about whether someone's doing the job. Because at the end of the day, it is the output, it is the outcome. If that's fine, then great. But other than that, if you aren't watching someone put together something on the line, right, on a production line, then many of our leaders, they're just engaging with their employees primarily virtually. And what is it that you're not seeing? So to your point earlier, though, it is a more intentional touch point, checking in, how things going, because there aren't any drive-bys, right? Mm-hmm. There aren't any of these casual occurrences of, oh, what's happening, and for the employee, they can't carelessly say, hey, Michelle, I have this meeting, I just want to bounce something off of you. So I think there is an opportunity for tools that, and I know that there's some out there where these virtual environments where you can just say, I'm around, I'm open, I'm around, and it's kind of like a virtual coffee break room, and you just see who's there, right? And being able to interact in a way that's a little bit less formal, and that you can bump into people in that way. But I think it goes back to whose need are we really talking about? Is it the manager's need to feel comfortable, or is it the employees' need to really be managed in that way, so that you can see what they're doing?
Yeah, those are really good points. This kind of leads into the last trend that we're going to talk about, which is around L&D's role in building an equitable workforce. There's really been an increased social unrest across our country. And I think the majority of Americans now believe that there is a problem with racial discrimination in our country. And this has really ignited a social movement of sorts that's really requiring organizations to reflect on their company culture and make necessary changes. But when we're thinking about L&D's role in this and really eliminating racial bias and discrimination in the workplace, it's much larger than a training issue. We need more than one isolated diversity training event for this. Can you speak a little to how L&D can help support these organization-wide efforts.
Yeah, one of the things I will say is that it's also about partnering, and that you being a good partner with your DEI group, being a good partner with other areas of the organization that are championing these efforts are as the primary of their scope. So we should be just as much as a partner to them as we are in the business. One of the key things that we can do as an L&D group is actually model the behavior that we're asking others to do. So our learning environment should be inclusive. Our groups should be diverse. Our external facilitation teams, they should be diverse. It's one thing to purport that you have a diverse culture and that you believe in those tenets, and you bring in a delivery group that is not diverse at all. So there are a lot of subtle things that we are sending messages about that we may not be aware of. Even from how we go about doing our delivery of our training, when we do it, all those things are about inclusion. And are we really thinking about what we do? Not just supporting, but how are we visible models in that aspect? And then the other thing is that many of the champions of D&I organizations and any organization that has a DEI team, they aren't the L&D experts, right? We are. So how do we assist them proactively about how to create the right type of development and learning plans around that? Because I do believe that there's a significant aspect of DEI that is a capability and a competency. And we have to also recognize that people don't want to be not good at something, right? Because we think DEI is just a mindset sometimes, right? We think it's just a decision. It's my values. I believe in this, but there's a skill about how we do that at work. And we don't have bold conversations at work. So how do we as an L&D team help to create the environment where people can have those conversations, but also help the other parts of the organization design those environments to make that happen? So that's where I see our role is as a model, but also as an expert consultant, but also as a partner, and being able to help close the gap and looking at it as a capability build. And as I've said in the past, is that inclusion and those types of behaviors are skills that it doesn't mean you're a bad person, doesn't mean you're not a good person, doesn't mean that you don't believe in it. It means that you have to build that muscle up so that you are doing it on a consistent basis, and it no longer becomes second effort, but it becomes second nature.
Right. Well, these have been all wonderful insights. I've really enjoyed hearing your perspective on all these trends and what's been going on at Johnson & Johnson. I know we're at time, so we'll wrap up here.
But thank you, Michelle. And just the work that you and training industry has done, I think has given us that data, right? And that kind of unbiased data and that broad looking metrics to let us know where we need to look next. Mm-hmm. And are we in the right place now? So I want to thank you and your organization for what it does.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Do you guys have time for a couple of quick questions that came in through the audience platform?
Sure, definitely, if they're easy.
No promises, Cecil. Sorry. Yeah. So as everybody's well aware, a lot of companies in the last year kind of rushed to some e-learning with, leading to a pile of e-learning content on the regular employee. So do you have any idea kind of how to avoid an e-learning trap like that?
So let me make sure I understand the question. So what do we do where last year we were like, let's push as much as we can out to people so that I think that, and I'll let Michelle add, I think that one, give ourselves some grace for doing that because we were trying to respond, right? So it's okay, right? The question is now, how do we back off of that? And now we can be even more intentional and take the time to assess, because if we have all these assets out there, have we gotten the feedback of what worked and what didn't work, right? And I think that's really important. So there's a benefit to pushing all that stuff out is now we can get some data, right, around what worked, what didn't work, in the context of our culture. And now we can whittle down to say, boy, we have some real best practices that we've learned over this past year that now we can be even more targeted and more focused in what we do. And maybe we can go back and redesign some of those assets based on the philosophy that we're changing about how we want to engage people in a virtual environment.
Okay, fantastic. And just one more quick one before we wrap up. A lot of people are having this challenge, looking for a tip here when delivering remote training or learning initiatives. Do you have any tips for making up for the now missing benefits of face-to-face interaction?
So Michelle, you maybe have a comment. I'll just make one comment. Sometimes the best way to engage someone is to leave them alone. And I wonder if we are trying to put too much content and too much FaceTime with people in e-learning, and we need to create more space for them to reflect and asynchronously interact and synthesize what they're learning. That can be much more powerful.
Yeah, I definitely think a lot of organizations have kind of had to lean into some creativity the past year on how to have more of that interactivity and some virtual and remote learning. So I'm trying to think. I think just finding ways to kind of formalize the informal. So how do you kind of go about maybe coaching in a virtual environment or something like that, like really kind of getting creative about some of those interactions that I think a lot of employees are craving.
Yeah, no, great stuff, as expected. So thanks, Michelle and Cecil. Love to chat about the trends shaping the future of learning and development and how learning leaders are kind of uniquely positioned to help the organizations achieve new levels of success. So thank you so much again for joining us and have a great rest of the day, Michelle and Cecil.
No, thank you. Thanks for the questions. I wrote those questions down because I want to make sure that I continue to bring those up and stay ahead of those also. So thanks to the audience also.
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Pleasure's all ours.
Have
Thanks.
a great day.